Welcome back. In this mini lecture, we will look at providing services. What do we mean by it? It is the act of performing a task for an organization or person that wants or requires it in exchange for acceptable compensation. Service provision is delivered by qualified staff or delegated to an appropriate partner. Public services should be mindful about meeting the expressed demands of customers, but also to an extent should be finding out their unexpressed needs. Service provision requires a high degree of interaction between a service consumer and a service provider. Public services are usually provided by government, but is it still true? Historically, public service provision began in the late 19th century with water and gas service provision. Later, also electricity and healthcare services were provided. Services can be nationalized, privatized, and provided by partners who can be both private and non-profit sector organizations. Public services can vary in regard to ownership, financing, and production. What are the principles of providing public services? There should be always availability of information about public services. The agency needs to explain how citizens can get information about public services and also explain how to get information about other related services if needed. There should be availability of information about service channels, where the agency explains what channels can citizens use to get access to public services. There should be clarity about what channels are used to contact citizens. Next, there should be always well-founded reasons for collecting, storing, and using data, which means that the agency is obliged to explain what data is collected and why can this data not be collected from the already existing information databases. Agency also needs to explain how can citizens get access to information about themselves and how are data stored and managed. There should be transparency of service provision and availability of information about leaving feedback. Then, the efficacy of providing public services needs to be considered. And lastly, there should be process-based development of public services, in which case the agency needs to follow the rules of process-based development of public services. For instance, setting goals, proposing alternative solutions, proposing applicable solutions, and developing the principles for continuous development and betterment of the service. In addition to the principles of providing public services, there are 3 principles of contractual delegation. These are the solidarity principle, where the goal of contractual delegation is to increase the quality of the service and access to the service. The process of handing over the service as delegating the service needs to be transparent and take into account and originate from the laws of the country. And lastly, contractual delegation, which does not mean that the agency can ignore the obligation of supervising the delivery of the service. Agencies need to publish statistics on the data at least once a quarter. Information needs to be published in the state portal and needs to be machine and human readable. In Estonia's case, there are many organizations who are responsible for developing and enhancing public services. Among them are the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Interior, and the Ministry of Economics and Communication. In Estonia, contractual delegation is decided and molded with the constitution and court settlements. Public services that somehow involve using the force or affects people's rights need to be managed by the central government to ensure people's constitutional rights. The Administrative Procedure Act, in turn, regulates the executive power of the country that deals with the day-to-day administration of the country. Administrative Cooperation Act defines the criteria and expectations set for individuals who have been delegated the authority to carry out public service provision. Local Government Organization Act is one of the legal acts that provides the framework for delegating public services in the local government level. Public Procurement Act sets the framework for carrying out public procurement and stakeholders' rights and responsibilities. State Liability Act sets the framework and regulates the issues such as responsibility when delegating services and sets the framework for service supervision. In addition to the before mentioned legal acts, there is also administrative contract that is sometimes used to delegate public services. In this case, Administrative Procedure Act is applied. To make things even more complicated, it is possible to use civil law contracts. In addition to that, public services can be delegated by a freely chosen method, but by keeping in mind the responsibilities stated in the State Liability Act. Also, in addition to that, each concrete situation should be looked through the respective act. For example, if a public transportation service is delegated, public transportation related acts should be consulted. There are some trends visible in the domain of delegating public services. For instance, to find a suitable partner, public agencies should organize public competition to find the suitable partner. But as it happens, these competitions have not been organized. This trend is especially visible in smaller cities. Often, there are not enough potential partners to be chosen from. This creates a situation where public agency just takes what they can get. At the same time, bigger cities and authorities have the opportunity and tendency to organize public competitions. Once the service provider or partner is chosen, the conditions and expectations need to be clarified to ensure continuous and suitable service provision. For that, detailed documents with needed requirements are determined. These documents involve information about required materials and resources, necessary infrastructure, the time period when the service is provided, and the quantity of the service. Currently, in Estonia's case, there is a situation where delegation contracts do not include enough information needed to successfully develop public services and its provision. In some of the cases, there lack the measures for quality control and reporting, for example. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for the next mini lecture on the characteristics of delegation.